What happens when a man who has stared down outlaws, criminals, and death itself for 7 decades on screen sits across from a talk show host who thinks political disagreement is a license to disrespect? What you're about to witness is one of the most unforgettable confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Clint Eastwood, the legendary icon who defined what it means to be tough in American cinema, showed the world that at 94 years old, he still doesn't suffer fools gladly. The studio went dead silent. The audience held their breath, and Behar discovered that some men have faced down far worse than pointed questions from a television host. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because trust me, you're going to want to talk about this one. The morning had started with an unusual energy at the View Studios. Clint Eastwood was coming on the show, and everyone from the producers to the camera operators knew this was going to be unlike any other interview. At 94 years old, Clint remained one of the most respected figures in Hollywood history. A man who had transitioned from television actor to movie star to Oscar-winning director with a grace and determination that had earned him admirers across every demographic and political spectrum. Behind the scenes, sources would later reveal that Joy had been looking forward to this interview for weeks, but not for the reasons one might expect. She had never forgiven Clint for his speech at the 2012 Republican National Convention, the one with the empty chair that had become instant political legend. She found his conservative politics an affront to everything she believed Hollywood should represent. And today she had decided she was going to let him know exactly what she thought of him and his outdated worldview. The studio lights were warm as Clint took his seat at the famous table. He moved with deliberate economy, settling into the chair with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that rushing never accomplished anything worthwhile. The audience gave him a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, and he acknowledged it with a slight nod, the ghost of that famous squint playing around his eyes. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with obvious respect. Our next guest is simply a legend. 7 decades in the entertainment industry, for Academy Awards, countless iconic roles that have defined American cinema. Please welcome the one and only Clint Eastwood. The applause continued as Clint settled back in his chair, completely at ease despite being the center of attention for millions of viewers. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. His voice was quieter now than it had been in his Dirty Harry days, but it still carried that distinctive rasp that had made him famous, that quality that suggested he had more important things to do than waste words. Sarah Haynes asked about his latest film, and Clint spoke with the concise precision that had made him legendary as a director. He talked about the story, about working with his cast, about why he still felt compelled to make movies at an age when most people had been retired for 3 decades. I just like to work, he said simply. Always have. Day you stop working is the day you start dying. I've seen it happen to too many friends, so I keep working. The audience appreciated his directness. This was the Clint Eastwood they had come to see. Economical with words, but saying more with a sentence than most people said with a paragraph. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly as it should. Then Behar leaned forward with that familiar edge in her voice, and the atmosphere in the studio shifted noticeably. So Clint, Joy began, her tone carrying an unmistakable challenge. You've had quite a career, but I have to ask you about something that a lot of people have never forgotten. That speech at the Republican convention in 2012, the empty chair, talking to an invisible Barack Obama. Don't you look back on that and cringe? Don't you think that was maybe the most embarrassing moment of your entire career? The question was clearly designed to humiliate, to force Clint into either defending something controversial or admitting regret. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably at the hostile tone. But Clint's expression didn't change at all. He simply looked at Joy with those famous pale eyes that had made countless movie villains reconsider their life choices. No, he said simply, I don't. Joy seemed thrown by the brevity of his response. But surely you can see how it looked, a legendary actor up there rambling to an empty chair. People were saying you had lost it, that you were senile, that it was sad to watch. People say a lot of things, Clint replied, his voice carrying no defensiveness whatsoever. Doesn't make them right. I was making a point about politicians and their empty promises. Some people got it, some didn't. I wasn't doing it to win approval from people who were never going to approve of me anyway. The response was so calm, so utterly unbothered that Joy seemed momentarily uncertain how to proceed. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps anger. Instead, she was getting the same unflappable cool that had made Clint Eastwood a star. But don't you think it damaged your legacy? Joy pressed. Here you are, this icon of American cinema, and you chose to use your platform for partisan politics. A lot of people lost respect for you that night. Clint's slight smile carried no warmth, only a kind of tired amusement. Joy, I've been in this business for 70 years. I've been called every name you can imagine. I've had critics write me off a dozen times, and I'm still here. You think I'm worried about what people thought of a speech I gave 12 years ago? He leaned back slightly, completely relaxed. I served my country in the army during Korea. I've made over 60 films. I've directed pictures that won Academy Awards. I've employed thousands of people over my career. That's my legacy. One speech at a political convention doesn't change any of that, no matter how much some people might want it to. Joy's face had tightened with frustration at her inability to rattle him. But that's just it, Clint. You're a Hollywood legend, and you've aligned yourself with political positions that most of Hollywood finds repugnant. The Republican Party, conservative causes. Don't you feel like you've betrayed your industry? The question revealed more about Joy's perspective than she probably intended. Clint's eyes narrowed slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. Betrayed my industry. I've been making movies since 1955. I've created opportunities for hundreds of actors, writers, directors. I've kept crews employed for decades. I've made films that have grossed billions of dollars. That's what I've given to this industry. He paused, his gaze fixed on Joy with an intensity that made her shift in her seat. What I haven't given them is my independent thought. And I'm not about to start now. I think for myself, always have. If that bothers some people in Hollywood, that's their problem, not mine. Joy tried to regain the offensive, but the things the Republican Party stands for. The observation landed with precision, and several audience members actually applauded before catching themselves. Joy's face had gone red. That's not fair, Clint. There's a difference between free speech and hate speech, between opinion and misinformation. Is there? Clint's voice was quiet but carried clearly through the studio. And who decides which is which? You. People who agree with you? Seems to me like the definition keeps changing depending on who's doing the talking. Joy was visibly frustrated now, her careful plan to corner Clint falling apart against his refusal to be provoked. Let's talk about your films then, Joy said, shifting tactics. A lot of people have criticized your work for glorifying violence, for promoting a certain kind of toxic masculinity. Dirty Harry was accused of being fascist propaganda. Don't you have any responsibility for the culture of violence in this country? Clint looked at her for a long moment before responding. Dirty Harry was a movie about a cop trying to stop a serial killer while bureaucrats got in his way. Came out in 1971. You want to blame me for violence in America because of a movie I made over 50 years ago? He shook his head slowly. I've also made films about the consequences of violence. Unforgiven was about a man destroyed by the violence he committed. $1 Million Baby was about the tragedy of broken dreams. Letters from Yuma showed war from the perspective of our enemies to remind us they were human, too. But you don't want to talk about those, do you? They don't fit the story you want to tell. The critique was devastating in its accuracy. Joy had cherry-picked his most controversial work while ignoring the films that complicated her narrative. I'm just pointing out that your films have a certain perspective, Joy said defensively. A perspective that many people find problematic. Problematic. Clint repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. That's one of those words that means whatever the person using it wants it to mean. My films have a perspective. Yes, my perspective. I'm the director. That's how it works. You want films with your perspective, go make them yourself. The audience laughed, and Joy's embarrassment was visible. You know what I find interesting, Joy? Clint continued, his voice still calm, but now carrying an undertone of steel. You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to put me in a box, trying to make me apologize for my politics, my films, my opinions, But you haven't asked me a single question about the craft of film, about what I've learned in 70 years, about why I'm still doing this at 94. You're not interested in any of that. You just want me to say, I'm sorry for not thinking the way you think I should. The observation stripped away the pretense of journalism and exposed the interview for what it had become, an ideological interrogation. I'm asking the questions that our viewers want answered, Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Are you? Clint's eyebrow raised slightly. Or are you asking the questions that you want answered? Because I've done a lot of interviews over the years, and most journalists are interested in the work. You seem interested in something else entirely. Joy tried to recover. I'm interested in accountability. You're a public figure with enormous influence. Don't you think you have a responsibility to use that influence in ways that help rather than hurt? I make movies that entertain people and sometimes make them think. That's how I help. I employ people and treat them fairly. That's how I help. I served my country when I was young and I've paid my taxes every year since. That's how I help. He leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly filling the space. What I don't do is tell other people how to think or vote or live their lives. That's not my job. That's not anyone's job, no matter how righteous they think they are. Joy seemed to be running out of angles of attack, but she wasn't ready to give up. But Clint, the Republican Party you support has pushed policies that many people believe are harmful to women, to minorities, to the environment. How can you align yourself with that? Clint was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more powerful. Joy, I've worked with more women and minorities in my career than most people in Hollywood. I've given opportunities to actors and directors who couldn't get them anywhere else. I judge people by their work, not by their skin color or what's between their legs. That's how I was raised, and that's how I've lived my life. He paused, his gaze unwavering. As for the environment, I drive an electric car and have solar panels on my house, but I don't lecture other people about their choices because I figure they're adults who can make their own decisions. Seems to me that's becoming a pretty radical position these days. The audience laughed again and Joy's frustration boiled over. You can make jokes, Clint, but these are serious issues. People are suffering because of the policies your party supports. Clint's expression hardened. My party. I'm a libertarian. Joy. I believe in individual freedom and limited government. I think people should be free to live their lives without politicians and TV hosts telling them what to do. If that makes me a villain in your eyes, so be it. He straightened in his chair, and despite his 94 years, there was something formidable about his presence. Let me tell you something about suffering since you brought it up. I grew up during the Depression. My family had nothing. My father moved us around California looking for work wherever he could find it. I know what it's like to be hungry, to be scared, to not know where your next meal is coming from. His voice carried the weight of lived experience. I built everything I have through work, hard work. Over many decades, nobody gave me anything, and I've used what I built to create opportunities for other people. That's my philosophy. Work hard, treat people fairly, mind your own business. It's not complicated. Joy tried one more time. But don't you see how that bootstrap mentality ignores systemic inequalities? Not everyone has the same opportunities you had. Clint looked at her for a long moment. I was a poor kid from Oakland whose father dug swimming pools for a living. What opportunities do you think I had? I made my opportunities. That's what people do when they want something badly enough. He shook his head slowly. You know what I think the real problem is, Joy? I think some people have decided that disagreement is the same as hate. That having a different opinion makes you a bad person. That's not how a free country works. That's not how adults should treat each other. The observation cut to the heart of the entire confrontation. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Clint wasn't finished. I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of changes in this country. Some good, some not so good. But the worst change I've seen is this idea that you can't respect someone you disagree with. That's dangerous thinking. That's the kind of thinking that tears countries apart. The studio was completely silent. Clint's words carried the authority of someone who had lived through enough history to understand what he was saying. You came at me today with a lot of hostility, Joy. You question my politics, my films, my character. And you know what? That's your right. That's free speech. But here's what I want to say to you and everyone watching. He looked directly into the camera, his famous eyes holding the gaze of millions. I don't hate you for disagreeing with me. I don't think you're a bad person because you see the world differently than I do. I just think you're wrong about some things, same as you think I'm wrong, and that's okay. That's what living in a free country means. We can disagree without being enemies. He turned back to Joy. I've made about 40 films as a director. Some were conservative, some were liberal, some were just stories about human beings trying to figure out their lives. I've never made a film to push an agenda. I've made films to entertain people and hopefully make them feel something. That's all any artist can do. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. I came here to talk about my new film and maybe share some stories from 70 years in this business. Instead, I got interrogated about my politics like I was on trial for thought crimes. That's fine. I faced tougher crowds than this. That famous squint returned, and for a moment, everyone in the studio saw the man who had stared down Lee Van Clee in the Italian desert, who had dared punks to make his day, who had earned the respect of audiences for 7 decades. But I'll tell you something, Joy. The reason I'm still standing here at 94, still working, still relevant, is because I never worried about what people thought of me. I did the work. I trusted the audience. I stayed true to myself. That's the only advice I have for anyone in this business or out of it. Do the work. Be yourself. Let the chips fall where they may. He nodded to Whoopi. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. And then with the same unhurried calm that had characterized the entire interview, Clint Eastwood walked off the stage, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host who looked like she had just learned a very difficult lesson about picking fights with legends. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building. Some people were standing, some were cheering. And Joy Behar sat at the table looking smaller somehow than she had at the beginning of the interview, like someone who had brought a knife to a gunfight and only realized it when the shooting was over. What had started as an attempted takedown had become something else entirely. A masterclass in how to maintain dignity under fire. A demonstration of what real confidence looks like. A reminder that some men have faced down so many challenges in their lives that one more hostile interviewer is nothing but a minor inconvenience. And as the studio fell into reflective silence, one thing was absolutely clear. Clint Eastwood had walked into The View as a legend and walked out having reminded everyone exactly why he had earned that title. Not through anger or cruelty or matching hostility with hostility, but through the quiet, unshakable certainty of a man who knew exactly who he was and didn't need anyone's approval to keep being it. The aftermath of that interview would dominate conversations for weeks. Clips of Clint's calm, devastating responses would be shared millions of times across social media. Think pieces would be written about political discourse, about respect across ideological lines, about what it really means to be confident versus what it means to be loud. Some would praise Joy for asking tough questions. Many more would note that there was a difference between tough questions and hostile interrogation, and that Clint had revealed that difference simply by refusing to play the game she wanted him to play. But perhaps the most lasting impact was something harder to measure. In a media landscape that rewarded outrage and conflict, Clint Eastwood had demonstrated that dignity was still possible, that you could disagree without being disagreeable. That real strength wasn't about dominating others, but about being so secure in yourself that others' attacks simply couldn't land. At 94 years old, he had given a masterclass in something that seemed increasingly rare, being an adult. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.